Alright, so the last page is just a whole mess of unit circle values. And this is very much what the last one of the pages of your test looks like. It's not the last page, it's like the third page. You want to be really careful and make sure you have sine and cosine correct. So however, whatever kind of trick or memorization technique you can make up or make work for you so that you can make sure to have sine and cosine correct before you start your test will help you. You want to make sure you have those straight so that when you flip when you flip sine to get cosecant, you don't get both of those, both sine and cosecant wrong. That would be great. So with most of these are not values that are on the unit circle. Most of these are rotations. So we're going to either have to add or subtract 2 pi in almost all of these cases. So be prepared to do that. All right, well, let's just get started. So the things that are important to us really are our reference angle, or that would be our first quadrant angle that goes with the angle that we're given, and then which quadrant we're in so that we know whether we need a positive or negative answer. All right, I'm just going to bust through them. Again, just like when you're watching any other video, if I go too fast, pause and catch up. If I go too slow, fast forward. If you don't need one of these problems, or if you've already checked some of your work and you're only looking for a specific one, I'm going to try to do as many of these on one video as I can, just so I can do a little less uploading. That's what I want to do. All right, tangent of 11 pi over 4. 11 pi over 4 is not on our unit circle, so we need to start by finding the coterminal angle. We're always going to add or subtract 2 pi. Here we need to subtract 2 pi. And in fourths, 2 pi is 8 pi over 4. 11 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4. So that's the angle that we're really working with. That's the coterminal angle here. So at all of our fourths, tangent is 1. Or negative 1. And at 3 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4 is in the second quadrant. And in the second quadrant, tangent is negative. Moving right along. Feel free to ask me any follow-up questions in class that you might have. Cosine of 5 pi over 3 is on our unit circle. At all of our thirds, cosine is 1/2. 5 pi over 3. 5 pi over 3 is in the fourth quadrant, and cosine is positive. So you don't need that little plus, but it makes me happy to feel like I've dealt with the ratio and the sine. All right, cosine of negative pi. Negative pi is too small, not on our unit circle. So I'm going to add 2 pi to see what the coterminal angle is. Negative pi plus 2 pi is pi. So cosine of negative pi is going to be the same value as cosine of pi. And at pi, cosine is negative 1. First row done. On to the next. If you're watching the video and you haven't tried these on your own, why don't you pause and try to at least find the coterminal angles and come back. All right. Sine of negative 11 pi over 6. Work with the angle first. Negative 11 pi over 6 is too small to be on our unit circle. It's not between 0 and 2 pi. So I'm going to add 2 pi. And 2 pi and 6 is 12 pi over 6. Negative 11 pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6 is pi over 6. So pi over 6 is the angle that I'm going to work with. And sine at pi over 6, that's first quadrant. Sine at pi over 6 is positive 1/2. All right, tangent. Don't cringe every time you see tangent. It's not that bad. Let's work with negative 10 pi over 3 first. First off, negative 10 pi over 3 is too small, so we need to add 2 pi. And 2 pi in thirds is 6 pi over 3. So when I add 6 pi over 3, I'm still negative. It's still negative 4 pi over 3. So if what you did was just undo one negative rotation, undo it some more. So I'm going to add 2 pi again. And again, 2 pi in thirds is 6 pi over 3. So negative 4 pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3 gets us to 2 pi over 3. And that is between 0 and 2 pi. That is an angle we can work with. So at all of our pi over 3's, tangent is radical 3. And 2 pi over 3 is in quadrant 2. And in quadrant 2, tangent is negative. If you don't have those tangent values memorized and you need to rely on sine and cosine for E, then you need to do sine divided by cosine. So sine at 2 pi over 3 is negative radical 3 over 2, and positive radical 3 over 2, and cosine at 2 pi over 3 is negative 1/2. So if you're dealing with tangent that way, then do that division. You will come up with negative radical 3. I really suggest that you do the best you can to memorize those tangent values. All right, cosecant. 7 pi over 3 is more than 2 pi, so we've got to shrink it down. Again, this one is too big, so we're going to subtract 2 pi this time. Last problem on part E, we were adding 2 pi. Here, we're going to subtract 2 pi. And when we subtract 2 pi, we get down to pi over 3, which is our first quadrant angle. So pi over 3 is what we're looking at. We want cosecant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with sine of pi over 3 first. Sine of pi over 3 is radical 3 over 2. To get cosecant, I'm going to take the reciprocal. So cosecant of pi over 3, I'm going to flip it, 2 over radical 3, and I'm going to rationalize. I feel like we've done that a couple of times in the review already. So the numerator here is 2 radical 3, and the denominator here of our final answer, radical 3 times radical 3, is 3. 2 radical 3 over 3. Alright, I feel like that's enough for one video. I will pick up in the next video with part G.